Thanks so much. It is outstanding to be here. I'm incredibly excited about tonight and to hear how loud I sound. As Brad mentioned, we are here tonight. We have an amazing group of storytellers, people with remarkable experiences and deep lessons learned. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my story, the path that I've taken, and the profound lessons about the power of personal stories to create change. So my story begins when I was a young boy in Santa Barbara, California. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be this guy. Go back 1 second. Gordon Gekko. So I saw the movie Wall Street, and I was about 9 years old, and I go to my mom, and I say, Mom, I really have this guy I want to be like. It's Gordon Gekko because he's cool and slick, and most importantly of all, he is rich. And my mom was hoping, of course, I was kidding, and I was not. And I continued that all the way, that mentality, that passion, all the way until I went to college, which you see here. So Stanford, as many of you might know, it's sort of like a summer camp for 4 years. Had a great time. So I go to Stanford and I realize that there's an even faster way for me to become rich. It's called the internet. This is 1998. It's the heart of the bubble. And I remember my freshman year, the most poignant moment was my first week. I found out there was a kid who just had stopped out. His company had gone public. He's worth $100 million. And I wanted to be just like him. And so the summer after my freshman year, I ended up going and becoming a venture capitalist for the summer, and I came back to Stanford and was determined to find my own billion-dollar idea. And so I worked with one of my classmates and my roommate at the time, and we racked our brains about what we might be able to create, and we finally had what we thought to be this epic idea. It was a sports betting website. Like, that was our epic idea. And we started feverishly going through all the financials and determining how much money we could make until we hit this small bump, which is that it was illegal. But of course, we were entrepreneurs, and that was not going to stop us. And so we ended up researching a few more hours and realized that, in fact, it was legal in the Virgin Islands. And we sincerely spent the next 2 hours deliberating about how much money we would have to make to justify never coming back to the United States. Seriously. And so finally, one of the guys came into the room. He says, well, but your family's priceless. And MasterCard had a great advertising campaign at that point. We agreed, and I think for good reason, in our case, we had the bubble burst in 1999. So immediately afterwards, I revert to this passion again to get involved in banking. And then I have a very fateful conversation with this guy, my brother, Nick. I go home my senior year for winter break, and we have a conversation I did not expect to have. Nick comes out, totally to my surprise, as gay. And then he says the most profound and impactful line in my life, which was, he said, Ben, what was most painful about being a young, closeted gay American wasn't seeing people that were explicitly anti-gay. It was seeing good people stand by and do nothing. People like you. And I had been so enraptured in my own success, so passionate about what I could do for myself, I didn't even see the suffering of my own brother. And so I was ashamed, and I went to my room that night, and I searched, and I looked at Google, and I said, I wanted to find out more about homophobia. And I came across a photo that I first mistook for my brother. It looked just like my brother. And it's this guy. Not my brother, it's Matthew Shepard. And just 3 years before Matthew was grabbed, he was beaten, he was tortured, he was strung up against a fence and left to die in Wyoming. And I didn't even know. And I wept. I cried for Matthew, I cried for Nick, and I cried at the shame I had for what I had not done. And it was that night that I turned 180 degrees and determined that I was not going to have that happen to my life again, that I wanted to dedicate myself not to serving my own needs, but to serving others. But of course, I had no idea what to do. And so I started deliberating, and I said, well, I'm going to go to the one place in the world I know I can go to make positive change. I decided to go to Washington, D.C. Not ironically. And what I found in D.C. would have dismayed any idealistic 22-year-old, which is this crazy dynamic where the people's house is largely populated by a small group of special interests and a systemic, disadvantaged public that had a difficult time representing its own interests. It's broad, it's hundreds of millions of people, they're difficult to organize, and so small groups of muddied interests oftentimes won out. I didn't know what to do, and so I did with almost every other sort of ambitious, benighted, young 25-year-old in DC did when they don't know how to make a difference. I decided to go to law school. And I was 1 week away from going to law school, and I get an email address for law school, and that gave me access to this thing called the Facebook. It was in 2005. And the Facebook is only access was given to both university students and eventually grad students. And I see immediately that the same technology that can connect people around photos or friends can be leveraged to connect people around issues and things they care about and mobilize them collectively for change. And so I feverishly then spend the next 3 days writing this business plan and decide only a few days before, after I'd already posted my first tuition payment, not to go to law school and to start change.org instead. My parents, again, thought I was crazy, but I was passionate about this idea. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so I go and I get a co-founder, my friend from Stanford, Mark Demos, to start with me, and we start building this platform, and we eventually launch. In 2007, of course, we assume that it's going to go viral and millions of people will use it. And it lands with a thud. And almost no one uses it. And we didn't know anything about what we were doing. We had no idea how to build a successful internet platform. And so after this, we start building new tools. We try to build every tool you can imagine to connect people and allow them to take action around skills-based volunteerism and virtual political action committees. And the more we build, the fewer people come. And so after, I'm not even kidding, 3.5 years of this drudgery, of this painful persistence, we decided to start stripping away features and make things easier and make it kind of easier to start these things called petitions, which we didn't think really mattered because historically they hadn't shown a whole lot of impact. And then something happened from the most unexpected of places. So we see a petition start on the site from a woman in South Africa. And she writes the following story, writes a story about how just a few weeks before there was a woman walking down the street in Cape Town, South Africa. And she gets grabbed and thrown into a shack, and she's raped and almost killed. And the reason is she's a lesbian woman, and the man was trying to turn her straight. It's this awful act called corrective rape, happened 10 times alone in Cape Town every single week at this point. And so this woman, Ndume, the woman you see photoed here, is actually a friend of hers, and she saw this, and it happened to her partner just a year before, and her partner had died, and she had had enough. And so she goes to an internet cafe in a shanty town outside of Cape Town, starts a change.org petition, asking the government to take action with seemingly no network and no hope. And she gets, over the next 7 days, 170,000 people join her from 150 countries. It becomes the biggest media story that week in South Africa, and then extends weeks on end, and people then mobilize in front of Parliament for several weeks using those tools and using the momentum. And after a month of campaigning and decades of ignoring the issue entirely, Parliament passes a national task force to investigate and to stop the incidents of corrective rape in that country because of Ndume. It's a remarkable story. And what's even more remarkable, I think, is not just what happened, but why it happened, because this issue was not new. Right? It was not new at all. And if you ask the people who signed that petition, who'd gotten mobilized just a few weeks before, if they really cared about the issue of rape in Africa, if they were honest with themselves, they'd have to say, well, not really. But you tell them the story of Ndume and Ndume's struggle, and you ask them to join her in collective action, and you get a very different results. And the media responds very differently, and the government cannot ignore it. And this is what we're seeing happen every single day all around the world. And at this point, when this campaign happened, I first reflected, it's the first viral campaign we had to really demonstrate the power of this model. And I realized to myself that the reason I was there to begin with was because of personal stories. And when I was in college, I knew that discrimination against LGBT people was bad. But it wasn't until my brother told me his story and I read Matthew's that it deeply hit and resonated. It wasn't until then that it dramatically changed my perspective and changed my actions. And we are seeing that all the time. 25,000 petitions every month with 25,000 individual stories started. And these are winning every single day. And I'll just highlight a couple more. There's a woman, an 11-year-old girl, who was about to die earlier this year because she needed a lung transplant. Sarah Mercanal. And her parents were fighting the system because there's actually a rule at the time you couldn't get a lung transplant if you're under age 12. And they fought this rule and they fought the bureaucracy and they couldn't get a response. And so out of despair, her mom starts a petition. It gets 200,000 people to join. It becomes a massive media story all over CNN and ABC and CBS. And it embarrasses the government, gets them to review and revise the policy. And because that Sarah has 2 lungs, is alive, and many other kids will be so as well. If you ask most of the people who joined the campaign a week before if they really cared about lung transplants, they'd probably tell you no. But you tell them the story of Sarah and they mobilize like never before. And the one other example I'll give, because it's so proximate to this location actually, Grays Lake, about an hour north of here in Chicago. There's a young woman, Abby Goldberg, pictured here, who about a year and a half ago, for an 8th grade project, decides that she wants to reduce plastic in her town. So she petitions her city council to pass a tax on plastic bags. And in response to this, the plastics industry gets a law passed at the state government to make it illegal for cities in Illinois to pass taxes on plastic bags. Not even kidding, brilliant move. But Abby is undeterred, and Abby starts a petition asking Governor Quinn, the governor of this state, to veto the bill, someone you can't even vote for, 13-year-old girl. And she mobilizes more than 100,000 people to join her. It becomes a massive media storm. Chicago Tribune covers it a number of times, great stories, and because of this, the governor calls her on her home phone line last year. Says, Abby, I've been inspired by your campaign, and I want you to be the first to know that I'm going to veto the bill. Incredible stuff. We have known for a long time the power of personal stories. That's not new, but what's new is technology's ability to massively scale this, to give anyone the platform to tell their story, spread virally, and mobilize millions of people. Right? We used to live in a world in which money trumped voice. And in that world, businesses and special interests overwhelm people. They have the advantage. But we now live in a world in which voice is more powerful than money. And in that world, people went out over special interests. And that is the world we're entering, and I'm so excited about it, and I hope you will join us as well. So, thank you very much.